On the night of the blood moon, Rose gave birth to twin sons. One boy entered the world screaming, healthy and strong. Before she could even hold him properly, he was carried away to the future Alpha, who had paid for his birth. The second child arrived in silence. No cry, no movement, no breath. After several desperate attempts to save him, the room fell quiet. The women attending the birth wrapped the tiny body in white cloth and prepared him for burial before sunrise. Outside the chamber, guards waited. Below, the future Alpha celebrated the birth of his heir, and Rose sat alone, believing she had lost her second son forever. She begged for one final moment to say goodbye. Holding the child against her chest, she kissed his cold forehead and whispered that she would have loved him enough for both of them. Then the impossible happened. The baby's tiny chest rose, his fingers moved, and a weak cry broke the silence. Rose froze. Everyone believed her son was dead. His name had already been removed from the pack records. His grave was already waiting. If anyone discovered he was alive, both of her children would belong to the Alpha, and she would leave the palace with empty arms. So less than an hour after giving birth, Rose wrapped her living son in a blanket, climbed out the palace window, and vanished into the winter night. For the next 6 years, the most powerful Alpha in the kingdom would mourn a child who had never truly died. Chapter 1. The night they sold her future, Rose was 24 years old and kneeling on a cold stone floor, praying the man she called father would live until morning. The candles in the healer's hut had burned down to stubs. Her adoptive father lay on the cot, his breath rattling in his chest like wind through a broken door. Silver lung, the healers called it, a wasting sickness that no ordinary pack could cure. The medicine that could save him came only from the Bloodmoon pack, the richest and most feared territory in all the lands, and that medicine cost more money than her whole pack would see in 100 years. So when the messenger from the Bloodmoon pack arrived at their door wearing a black cloak stitched with silver thread, Rose already knew somehow that he had come for her. "You are the one they call Rose," the messenger said. "It was not a question. The elders of the Bloodmoon pack request your presence, tonight." Her adoptive mother gripped her wrist hard enough to bruise. "Why her? She is nothing. She is an Omega. She has no wolf worth speaking of." The messenger's eyes slid to Rose and stayed there, and for one strange moment, she felt as though he were looking not at her face but at something underneath it, something hidden in her blood. "The elders did not explain themselves to me," he said, "but they mentioned the price of silver lung medicine. They said the girl would understand." And she did understand. That was the terrible part. She understood completely. They took her by carriage across 3 territories to the Bloodmoon Palace. Black stone and silver banners, towers that scraped the clouds, a fortress built by wolves who had never once been conquered. Rose had grown up in a pack so poor they patched their roofs with bark. Walking through its iron gates, she felt like a sparrow carried into the den of a lion. The elders received her in a hall of cold marble. There were 7 of them, ancient and gray, seated in a half-circle of carved chairs. At the center, in the highest chair, sat a woman with a face like a blade, Elder Magda, the eldest and the cruelest, though Rose did not yet know her name. "Come closer, child," Magda said. "Let us look at you." Rose stepped forward. She kept her chin level. She had learned long ago that the surest way to be hurt was to look like prey. The elders studied her in silence. Then Magda made a small sound, half amusement, half disgust. "So this is her, the bloodline the prophecy promised. Look at her. Thin as a reed, an Omega's scent, not a drop of power you could measure with a spoon." She leaned forward. "The moon goddess has a cruel sense of humor." Rose did not understand a word of it, and she said so. "It does not matter what you understand," Magda replied. "Only what you agree to. Listen carefully, girl, because I will say this once." And then she explained. The Bloodmoon pack needed an heir. Their alpha, Alian Blackwood, the most powerful wolf in living memory, had refused every match the elders had arranged. He would take no mate. The bloodline of the Blackwoods, unbroken for 9 generations, would end with him unless an heir was born soon. The elders had searched far and wide for a female whose blood was strong enough to carry an alpha's pups and survive it. They had found Rose. "There is something in your lineage," Magda said, watching her closely. "Old and rare, strong enough for the task, even buried as deep as it is in a body as weak as yours. You will carry the alpha's child. You will give birth. And then you will leave, and the child will remain here. And you will never speak of it to anyone for the rest of your life." Rose's mouth had gone dry. "And if I refuse?" "Then your father dies in 3 days, screaming." Magda said it the way another woman might comment on the weather. "We have the only medicine that can save him. We are offering you enough to buy a lifetime of it. I would think very carefully, were I you, about the word refuse." There it was, the trap, sprung clean and final. Rose thought of her father on the cot, the man who had taken in a foundling no one wanted, who had given her his name when he had nothing else to give. She thought of how he had once carried her on his shoulders through a flooded river so her feet would not get wet. She thought of how he had never, not once, made her feel like the burden the rest of the pack believed her to be. "I want it in writing," Rose said. Her voice did not shake, and she was proud of that. "The money, all of it, sent to my family before anything else, and I want your word that the medicine keeps coming as long as he needs it." Magda smiled, and it was the smile of a woman who has won. Spoken like someone with sense after all, yes. "You will have your contract." That was how Rose signed away her body and her child for a vial of medicine and a promise. She pressed her thumb to the parchment, and the ink looked like blood in the candlelight, and somewhere in the palace above her a man she had not yet met slept without dreaming, not knowing that the elders had just bought his future and broken hers in the same stroke. She met Alpha Alien Blackwood the next morning. She had braced herself for a monster. The whole continent feared him, surely there was a reason. But when the doors opened and he walked in, what struck her first was not fear. It was the strange, sudden pull in her chest, as though an invisible thread had been hooked behind her ribs and yanked tight. He was tall and dark and brutally handsome, with eyes the gray of a winter storm. He moved like a man who had never in his life had to ask permission for anything. And the moment his gaze landed on her, she saw him go still. Saw something flicker across his face, quickly hidden, that she would only much later understand had been the same pull, the same thread, hooking him too. The mate bond, fated, undeniable. The rarest gift the moon goddess gave, and the elders had arranged for it to be used and thrown away like a rented tool. "This is her?" Alien said. His voice was low and cold. "This is her, Alpha," Magda answered. He looked at Rose for a long moment. She felt the bond straining toward him, and she saw in his jaw and the tightness around his eyes that he felt it too, and that he had decided in that very instant to crush it. "She accepted money to do this," Alien said. It was not a question either. There was contempt in it, cold and final. "Then we both know exactly what this is. A transaction, nothing more." He turned to the elders. "See that she is comfortable. I want a healthy heir. Beyond that, I do not want to know her name." And he left. Rose stood in the great cold hall with the bond aching in her chest like a fresh wound, and she understood the shape of her future with perfect clarity. She would love this man. The bond would see to that, whether she willed it or not. And he would never, ever love her back, because he had already decided she was something bought and paid for. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach, though there was nothing there yet. "I will not love him," she promised herself. "I will do this for Father, and I will leave, and I will not love him." It was the first promise she ever broke. 6 weeks later, in a tower room overlooking the Black Forest, the palace healer pressed her ear to Rose's belly, listened a long while, and then looked up with wide eyes. "2 heartbeats," the healer whispered. "My lady, there are 2, twins." And far below, in his cold throne room, the Alpha who had sworn he did not want to know her name felt the bond pulse once, sharp and bright, and pressed his fist against his own chest as though he could push the feeling back down where it belonged. The pregnancy changed everything, though neither of them would admit it. Rose was given a tower room with a window that faced the forest, and there she was meant to stay, quiet and hidden, until the children came. The elders treated her like a vessel, fed her the finest food, sent healers twice a day, and never once spoke to her as though she were a person. She was the womb that carried the air. That was all she was permitted to be, but the bond did not care about contracts. It grew. With every week it grew, threading itself deeper into her, until she could feel Alien's moods like weather moving across her own sky. When he was angry, her teeth ached. When he could not sleep, and he often could not sleep, she lay awake too, staring at the same moon. The bond was a bridge built without permission, and try as she might, she could not burn it down. What she did not know at first was that he felt it too. She learned it the day she fell. The tower's stair had iced over in the deep of winter, and she slipped. And Alien was simply there, faster than thought, catching her against his chest before she struck the stone. For one heartbeat he held her, his arms iron tight, his breath ragged with a fear far larger than the moment deserved. Then he set her on her feet, and his face closed like a slammed door. "Watch your footing," he said coldly, and left. But she had felt how his heart hammered. The bond did not let him lie to her, even when his mouth did. She learned it again in the nights. Her dreams in those months were dark things, and she would wake gasping. And more than once, surfacing from a nightmare, she found him there, a tall shadow seated in the chair by her bed in the dead of night, having come up through the dark when the bond carried her terror down to him. He never spoke of it. By morning he was always gone. But she stopped waking afraid, because some part of her had learned he would be there, and she learned it the evening he heard the heartbeats. The healer was listening to her belly when Alien passed the open door and stopped, caught by something, and the healer beckoned him in. Slowly, as though approaching a fire, the feared Alpha crossed the room and knelt and pressed his ear to the curve of her stomach, and went utterly still as two small heartbeats thudded against his cheek. Rose saw his eyes squeeze shut, saw a man drowning in something he would not name. "They're strong," was all he said when he rose, his voice rough. But he had knelt. The Alpha had knelt. Once, only once, it almost broke open. Their hands met over a warm cup of tea, and neither pulled away, and he was very close, the bond roaring between them. His gaze dropped to her mouth, and he leaned in, a breath from kissing her. And then he caught himself, jaw clenching, and stood, and walked out without a word. "Why did it have to be you?" she heard him say at the threshold, not turning back. Not a question, a wound. "Why would the goddess give me a mate I cannot keep?" He was a man at war with his own heart, and she was the territory they fought over. "You are a fool," she told her reflection one night, both hands cradling the great curve of her belly. "You are falling in love with a man who calls you a transaction." Her reflection did not argue. Inside her, two small lives turned and kicked, and she pressed her hands to them and whispered, "It doesn't matter. I will love you enough for 3. I promise. Whatever happens, I will love you enough." The night the twins came, the moon rose red. A blood moon, the rarest and most powerful of all moons, when the veil between the living world and the goddess's realm grows thin, when old bloodlines stir and ancient powers wake. The healers had warned that the birth might come then. The pull of such a moon often called pups into the world. They had not warned how much it would hurt. The pain took her at sunset and did not stop. For hours Rose labored in the tower room, while the red light poured through the window and turned everything the color of blood. The healers crowded around her. Somewhere below, she knew, Alien was pacing. She could feel his fear through the bond, sharp and electric, though he never came up, would not let himself come up. The first child came near midnight, when the blood moon stood at its highest. A boy, strong, furious, screaming his outrage at the cold world, a sound so full of life that the healers laughed even as they worked. They wrapped him and held him up, and Rose, half dead with exhaustion, reached for him with both arms and felt her whole heart break open with a love so fierce it frightened her. "A son," the head healer announced toward the door, where a runner waited to carry the news down to the Alpha. "The heir is born. The heir is healthy." But Rose's body was not finished. The second child was still coming, and the second child came wrong. He came in silence. He slid into the world pale and still, his small chest motionless, and the laughter in the room died all at once. The healers bent over him. They rubbed him, breathed for him, pressed their fingers to the tiny still chest, and the silence stretched on and on while Rose screamed at them to do something, anything, please. The head healer straightened. Her face had gone gray. She would not meet Rose's eyes. "This one did not draw breath," she said quietly. "I am sorry, my lady." "The second pup is gone." The room seemed to tilt. The red moonlight pulsed. Rose heard herself making a sound she had never made before, a low animal keening, and she reached out her empty arms. "Give him to me," she said. "Give him to me. Let me hold him just once, please, just once, before you take him away." The healers exchanged looks. It was not done. The dead were taken away quickly, the mothers spared the sight. But there was something in Rose's face that none of them could refuse, and at last the head healer wrapped the still little body in a white cloth and laid him in Rose's arms. He was so light, so terribly light and so cold. Rose bent over him. The first son had been carried down already. The contract was clear, the heir belonged to the Alpha, and the runner had not waited. So it was only Rose now, alone with the child the world had already given up on, in the red light of the blood moon. She pressed her lips to his cold forehead. She did not pray to the moon goddess, who had never once answered her. She only whispered into the small still ear the truth of her whole heart. "I would have loved you," she breathed. "I would have loved you so much. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry I couldn't keep you safe. My boy, my little boy." A tear fell from her cheek and landed on the child's face, and the child took a breath. It was the smallest sound in the world, a tiny, shuddering gasp. Rose froze. She thought she had imagined it. Then the little chest rose again, and a thin, furious wail broke out of him, and his eyes opened, and they were the gray of a winter storm, exactly like his father's. Alive. He was alive. Later, Rose would wonder whether it was the blood moon, or her own hidden blood, or simply a child who had not been ready to be given up. She would never know for certain, but in that moment she knew only one thing with the clarity of a struck bell. The pack records already said this child was dead. The runner had carried word below. If she handed him to the healers now, the elders would have two heirs to do with as they pleased, and they had already shown her how little a child's heart mattered to them. The contract gave both her children to the Alpha. Both. She would be sent away empty-handed and never see either of them again. But this one the world believed was gone. This one she could keep. Rose looked at the door. The healers were down the hall, conferring, certain there was nothing left to do for the dead child but bury him. The window of the tower faced the forest, and the forest, she knew, ran for miles in every direction. She did not think it through. There was no time to think it through. She only knew that she had been given a single impossible gift on the night of the blood moon, and she would not, could not, give it back. Rose wrapped her living son tight against her chest, climbed from the bed on legs that should not have held her, and went out the tower window into the red and silver night. Behind her, in the palace below, an Alpha held his firstborn son and felt, through a bond he refused to name, a wrenching, tearing grief that he could not explain and would spend 6 years trying to forget. Chapter 3. She named him Kieran. She chose the name in the first gray dawn after the blood moon, huddled in a hollow tree miles from Bloodmoon territory, the baby asleep against her chest. It meant Little Dark One, for his hair was already dark like hers, though his eyes were his father's gray. She did not let herself think about the father, or about the other son, the firstborn, the one she had heard cry once and never again. If she thought about him, she would lie down in the snow and not get up, and then both her children would be lost. So she walled that grief away in the deepest room of her heart and kept walking. She did not go home. Home was the first place the Blood Moon pack would look, and besides, the medicine had already done its work. Word reached her through a traveling trader that her adoptive father had recovered fully, that the money had come, that the family was well. It was the only good news in a black time, and she clung to it. She had paid the price, her father lived. That, at least, had not been for nothing. She settled at last in a small village at the very edge of the wild lands, a place too poor and too remote for any pack to bother claiming. She told the villagers she was a young widow, and they believed her, because grief needs no proof. She took in mending and sold herbs and healing salves. She had a gift for it, it turned out, a knack for knowing which plant would mend which hurt. And she raised her son. Kieran grew up gentle. That was the thing everyone said about him, the thing that made the village women smile and shake their heads. The alpha's blood was in him. Anyone could see it in the set of his shoulders, the storm-gray eyes. But where his father was cold, Kieran was warm. He cried when the village dogs were beaten. He carried injured birds home in his cupped hands. And he had a gift that Rose kept secret even from the neighbors. A gift that frightened her with its meaning. When something was hurt, Kieran could heal it. She first saw it when he was 4. A village boy had fallen and split his knee to the bone, screaming, blood everywhere. Before Rose could reach them, little Kieran had pressed both his small hands over the wound, his face scrunched in fierce concentration, and when he lifted his hands, the wound had closed to a thin pink line. "Don't tell anyone," Rose had whispered to him that night, holding him tight, her heart pounding with fear and wonder. "Your gift is a secret, my love, a precious secret, promise me." "Why, Mama?" "Because the world is not always kind to people who are different. One day you'll be big and strong and you can show the whole world, but not yet. For now it's ours, yours and mine." "Ours and yours," he agreed solemnly, and fell asleep in her arms, and she stayed awake watching him and wondering, not for the first time, what exactly ran in her blood that she had passed to him, for she knew of no ordinary wolf who could mend bone with a touch. He asked about his father, of course. Children always do. "Did I have a papa?" he asked her once, perhaps 6 years old, swinging his legs from a kitchen stool. Rose's hands went still in the bread dough. "Everyone has a papa, my love. Where's mine?" She chose her words like a woman crossing thin ice. "He's far away, in a great house, in a faraway land. He's very strong and very powerful, the strongest there is." "Does he know about me?" And there it was. The question with no kind answer. Rose looked at her son's hopeful gray eyes and could not bear to tell him the truth, that his father believed him dead, that his father had never held him, that his father did not know he existed. So she told him the only thing that was both gentle and true. "No, my love," she said softly, "he doesn't know about you, but that's not your fault. That was never your fault. That was the grown-ups' fault, mine a little, and the world's mostly." Kieran considered this with the grave seriousness of a small boy. "When I'm big," he announced, "I'm going to find him and tell him, and then he'll know." Rose turned back to her bread so he would not see her face. "When you're big," she agreed, "you can do anything you want." Far away, in the cold palace of black stone, another boy was asking the same question in reverse. His name was Lucian, and he was the heir to the Bloodmoon pack, the firstborn son of Alpha Alien Blackwood, raised in every luxury, taught by the finest tutors, trained in fighting and strategy and the cold arts of ruling. He was strong, far stronger than other children his age. He was clever, and he was the loneliest boy in the entire palace, for Lucian had everything a child could want except the one thing he wanted most. "Father?" he asked one evening. He was 6 and bold, and he had been working up his courage for days. "Where is my mother?" Across the great dinner table, Alpha Alien went very still. The servant seemed to freeze in place. It was a question no one in the palace was permitted to ask, and the whole household knew it, and yet here was the small heir asking it anyway, his chin lifted in a way that was painfully, achingly familiar, though Alien could not say why. "You have no mother," Alien said. His voice was flat. "You have me. That is enough. But everyone has a mother. Tomas has a mother. Even the kitchen dogs have—" "Enough." The word cracked like a whip, and Lucien flinched, and Alien saw the flinch and hated himself for it, and could not stop himself. He rose from the table and left the room because he could not look at his son's face, could not look at those storm-gray eyes that were his own eyes, set in a small face that held something of someone else, something he had spent 6 years trying not to remember. That night, Alien stood alone on the high balcony of the palace and looked at the moon, and the old grief moved in him like a sickness that never quite healed. He had not married. The elders pushed and pushed, paraded female after female before him, and he refused them all, and he could not have explained why if his life depended on it. He only knew that something had been torn out of him on the night of the Bloodmoon 6 years ago, and that the tear had never closed. There was one woman, though, who had refused to be refused. Her name was Liliana Vale, and she had made herself a fixture of the palace. She came from a powerful family, and 6 years ago the elders had all but promised her the Luna title once the matter of the heir was settled. She had been waiting ever since, patient, polished, certain her day would come. And in the meantime she had done something clever. She had made herself close to Lucien, bringing the lonely heir gifts, sitting with him when his tutors had gone, letting him believe she might one day be the mother he ached for. "Your father is simply not ready, sweet boy," she would murmur, smoothing Lucien's hair while her eyes tracked Alien across the room. "But when he is, you and I shall be a proper family." Lucien, who wanted a mother more than anything, did not love Liliana. There was a coldness in the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching, as though he were a step on a stair she meant to climb, but he wanted so badly to belong to someone that he let her sit with him anyway. And Liliana, counting the years, told herself the Luna title was already hers in all but name. He had buried the contract. He had buried the woman's name, the way you cut out a splinter. She had carried his children, and one had died, and she had gone away exactly as the contract demanded, and he refused to feel the ache that woke in him every time he looked at his son's face. A transaction, he told himself, the way he had told himself every night for 6 years. It was only ever a transaction. He almost believed it. Far away, in a poor village at the edge of the wild lands, Rose tucked her gentle son into bed and kissed his forehead and went to her own narrow bed and lay awake, as she always did, with the wall around the deepest room of her heart pressing in on her. She did not know that the wall was about to break, for it was that very season that the sickness came. Not Silverlung this time, but a wasting fever that swept the wild lands and that no village herb could touch. Kieran fell ill with it. Her gentle boy, who could heal others with a touch, could not heal himself. The gift did not work that way. Within a week he was burning up, fading, slipping toward the dark, and the village healer shook her head, and Rose understood with cold horror that her son was dying. There was only one place in all the lands with medicine strong enough to cure a wasting fever: the Bloodmoon pack. Rose stood over her son's burning bed and felt the wall in her heart crack down the middle. She had given up everything to keep this child, had run into a winter night with him pressed to her chest, had built a whole new life around keeping him safe and hidden. And now keeping him safe meant carrying him straight back into the lion's den, back to the pack that believed him dead, back to the elders who had bought her body, back to the cold alpha who must never learn the truth. She had no choice. There had never really been a choice, not from the very first night, not where her children were concerned. Rose wrapped her dying son in every blanket she owned, lifted him into her arms, and turned her face toward the black towers she had sworn she would never see again. "Hold on, my love," she whispered into his fevered hair. "Hold on. Mama's taking you home." She did not let herself hear the second meaning in the word. Chapter 4. The Bloodmoon territory had a public healing house at the edge of its lands, a place where any wolf, pack, or rogue could come and pay for the famous Bloodmoon medicine. It was the one part of the territory open to outsiders, and Rose prayed it was far enough from the palace that no one who mattered would ever see her there. She walked through the gates with her hood low and her dying son in her arms, and she did not feel the storm-gray eyes that turned to follow her, because she did not know that fate had already begun to close its jaws. The healers took Kieran at once. They were good, the best in the lands, and they moved fast, and within an hour the fever medicine was in him and the worst of the danger had passed. Rose wept with relief into her hands. Her son would live. She had only to wait 2 or 3 days for him to grow strong enough to travel, and then they would vanish back into the wild lands and no one would ever be the wiser. That was the plan. It was a good plan. It lasted exactly until the next morning, when Alpha Alien Blackwood rode to the healing house on pack business and felt the bond wake up. It hit him like a blade between the ribs. He was crossing the courtyard, his mind on grain stores and border patrols, when something that had been silent for 6 years suddenly blazed to life. A pull, a thread hooked behind his ribs and yanked tight, so old and so buried that for a moment he did not recognize it. Then he did, and it stopped him dead. The breath knocked clean out of him. The mate bond. The one he had crushed and buried and sworn he had killed. It was here. It was alive. It was close. "Alpha?" his guard said. "Alpha, are you—" But Alien was already moving, following the pull, helpless as a fish on a line, through the courtyard and down a long corridor toward a small recovery room, his heart slamming in a way it had not done in 6 years. He pushed open the door, and there she was, Rose, sitting at the bedside of a sleeping child, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her face thinner than he remembered and more beautiful, 6 years older and unmistakably, undeniably her. She looked up, and the bond flared between them so hard that they both gasped, the two of them, the woman in the chair and the Alpha in the doorway, struck by the same lightning at the same instant. "You," Alien breathed. Rose went white. She rose from her chair so fast it toppled. Every plan she had made, every wall she had built, every careful lie collapsed in a single heartbeat, because of all the people in all the lands. The one man she had crossed a continent to avoid was standing in the doorway looking at her as though she had risen from the dead. "Alpha," she managed. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. For a long moment neither of them moved. The bond raged between them, 6 years of crushed and buried feeling tearing loose all at once, and Rose watched the Alpha's storm-gray eyes move from her face to the bed, to the child sleeping in it. She saw the exact moment he saw the boy's face. She saw it land on him like a falling tower, because Kieran, asleep, with the fever flush fading from his cheeks, looked exactly like Lucian. Exactly. The same dark hair, the same line of the jaw. And when, at that worst possible moment, the boy stirred and opened his eyes, they were the same storm gray. Alien's own eyes, the Blackwood eyes, looking up at him out of a stranger child's face in a healing house at the edge of the world. "Who?" Alien said. His voice had gone strange and hoarse. He took a step into the room. "Who is this child?" "He's mine," Rose said. She moved between them on instinct, putting her body between the Alpha and the bed, her arms spread. "He's my son. He's sick. He's only just past the fever, please." "How old is he?" "Please, how old?" Rose, her name in his mouth after 6 years. He had not forgotten it after all. He had only buried it, the same as everything else. "How old is this child?" She could not lie. Staring at his face, at the dawning horror and hope and grief warring across it, she found she could not force out the lie. Her silence was its own answer, and she watched Alpha Alien Blackwood do the arithmetic that broke his world in half. 6 years. A child of 6. With Blackwood eyes and a Blackwood face, the mirror of the heir asleep in the palace. A child Rose had fled with into the night. A child the records said was dead. "It isn't possible," Alien whispered. He had gone gray as ash. The second child died. The healers, I held the firstborn, they told me the second was dead. They buried. He stopped. "They buried an empty grave, didn't they?" "He wasn't dead," Rose said. The truth came out of her in a rush now, because there was no holding it back. The wall was down. The deepest room of her heart was flung open at last. "He stopped breathing. They said he was gone. They gave him to me to hold just once, just to say goodbye, and he breathed. He came back. On the Bloodmoon in my arms, he came back to life. And the records already said he was dead, and the contract gave both my babies to you, and I would have lost them both. I would have had nothing." Her voice broke. "So I took him. I took my living son and I ran. And I have spent 6 years keeping him safe and keeping him hidden. And I never meant for you to know. I never meant for any of this." "Stop," Alien's voice cracked. He was staring at the boy as though at a miracle and a wound at once. You're telling me that for 6 years I have had one son, and you have had the other, and neither of us knew." "Yes. Yes, I have a second son. Yes. He's alive. Yes, Rose whispered. His name is Kieran. He's gentle and he's kind and he can heal things with his hands and he asks about you, he asks about his father, and I never knew what to tell him. Her own tears were running now. 6 years of them. I'm sorry. I know what I did. I stole your son from you. But you would have taken him from me, you and the elders. You'd have taken them both and sent me away with nothing. So don't you dare stand there and tell me I had a choice. And Alien, the cold alpha, the feared alpha, the man who had not let himself feel anything in 6 years, sank down slowly into the fallen chair as though his legs would no longer hold him, put his face in his hands, and made a sound that Rose had never expected to hear from him. He wept. I held him, he said into his hands, his voice wrecked. On the Bloodmoon, I held the firstborn and felt something tear, something I could never name. For 6 years I have had a hole in me I could not name. He looked up, his storm-gray eyes wet and wild. It was this. It was you, taking my son out a window into the dark, and the bond feeling it, and me too proud to understand my own heart. On the bed, little Kieran had pushed himself up on his elbows, watching the strange weeping man with wide and solemn eyes, and in his innocent, fever-thin voice he asked the question that had begun this whole story, the question that finished breaking both their hearts. Mama, Kieran said, is that man my papa? And the most feared wolf in the kingdom, who had forgotten how to breathe, finally answered. Yes, Alien said, looking at his lost son through his tears. Yes, I am. What none of them saw was the servant in the corridor, one of Liliana's, for Liliana kept eyes everywhere, slipping away to carry word back across the territory. Within a day, the Lady Vale would know that the Alpha had found a second son, and a woman, in a healing house at the edge of the world. And Liliana, who had waited 6 years for a Luna title she believed was already hers, would set down her wine very carefully and begin to plan. Alien moved them to the palace that same day, and there was nothing Rose could do to stop it. He is my son, the Alpha said in a voice that did not invite argument. He has been sick. He needs the best healers, the best food, the safest walls. You will both come to the palace. I am not, his jaw worked. I am not taking him from you. Do you understand me? I am not doing to you what was done to you. You will stay with him. But he comes home. And so Rose came back through the iron gates she had sworn she would never see again, walking beside the Alpha now instead of behind a messenger, her son's hand in hers, her heart in her throat. She had spent 6 years building walls. Now she walked straight into the one place where every wall would be tested. She did not yet know that the hardest part would not be facing the elders, or the Alpha, or the past. The hardest part would be the moment the two boys met. It happened the very next morning, and no one planned it, which was perhaps the only way it could have happened at all. Rose had left Kieran napping in their guest chambers and gone to speak with a healer. Lucian, curious, lonely Lucian, who had heard the whole palace whispering that the Alpha had brought home a strange woman and a strange boy, slipped away from his tutors and went exploring, as lonely children do. He found the guest chambers. He pushed open the door. And he stopped dead, because there, sitting up in the bed rubbing his eyes, was a boy who had his own face. The two children stared at each other across the room in absolute silence. You look like me, Lucian said at last accusingly. You look like me, Kieran said back. This is my house. My mama brought me here. I don't have a mama. I don't have a papa. They considered this, and then, with the swift, mysterious logic of small children who can become sworn enemies or best friends inside the same 5 minutes, they decided they liked each other. By the time Rose returned, she found the two of them sitting cross-legged on the floor, heads bent together, comparing the exact shape of their hands. She stood in the doorway with her heart in her mouth. His hands are the same as mine, Lucian informed her, holding both small hands up for inspection. Look, the same, even the crooked finger. Rose looked the same, even the crooked finger. She had known this moment would come. She had not known it would feel like this. like watching two halves of something broken drift back toward each other across 6 years of distance, not knowing yet what they were, only knowing that they fit. She knelt down between the two boys, and she made a decision that she would never regret, though it terrified her. She would not lie to them. She had lived a lie for 6 years. She would not build another one on the backs of these two children. "Kieran," she said gently. "Lucien, I have something to tell you, something very big. Can you both be very brave and listen?" They nodded, solemn, sensing the weight of it. "You're not just friends," Rose said. Her voice shook. "You're not just two boys who look the same. You're brothers, twin brothers. You were born on the same night, in this very house, at the very same hour. And then," her throat closed, but she pushed on, "and then the world made a terrible mistake, and you were separated, and one of you grew up here with your papa, and one of you grew up far away with me. But you were always brothers. You were brothers before you were even born." The two boys looked at each other. Then they looked at her. Then they looked at each other again. "Brothers," Lucien repeated, testing the word. "I always wanted a brother," Kieran said. "I always wanted a brother," Lucien said. And then, because they were 6, and because the heart of a 6-year-old does not need a year to do what an adult heart takes a decade to manage, they flung their arms around each other and held on, two halves of a broken thing finally clicking back together, and Rose put her hand over her mouth and wept. And in the doorway behind her, where she did not see him, Alpha Alien Blackwood stood watching his two sons embrace for the first time in their lives, and the cold thing in his chest cracked clean through. After that, the two boys were inseparable. What followed were days that Rose would remember, in years to come, as the strangest and sweetest of her life. The grim black palace, which had stood cold and silent for 6 years, filled up with the sound of running feet and shrieking laughter. The twins got into everything. They put a frog in a tutor's inkwell. They stole an entire pie from the kitchens and ate it under a table and were found out only because they fell asleep there, sticky and content. They invented a secret language that no adult could understand, made entirely of grunts and elbow jabs, and used it to plot mischief in plain sight. Lucien taught Kieran how to fight, proud to finally have someone to teach. Kieran, it turned out, was hopeless at it, too gentle, always pulling his punches, but he tried because his brother wanted him to. And Kieran taught Lucien something far rarer. He taught him about the healing gift, the secret thing, and discovered to his delight that Lucien had a fragment of it too, faint but real, so that the two of them together could mend a wounded bird so completely it flew straight up out of their cupped hands and away over the towers. "We're better together," Kieran said, watching the bird go. "We're better together," Lucien agreed, and the adults, watching, all thought the same thought in their own ways. For the palace had begun to thaw. The servants smiled now, and at the center of it, drawn together by their two laughing sons, were Rose and Alien, circling each other still, wary still, 6 lost years standing between them like a wall of ice. But the ice was thinning, and they both felt it. Every shared glance over the boys' heads, every evening spent watching their sons play while the fire burned low, the bond doing its patient, ancient work. One evening, after the boys were finally asleep, exhausted and tangled together in a single bed because they refused to sleep apart, Rose and Alien found themselves alone in the great hall, the fire low, the palace quiet. "They've never been happier," Alien said. He was looking at the fire, not at her. "Lucien, in 6 years I have never once heard him laugh like he laughs now." "Kieran's the same," Rose said softly. "He used to ask about you, about his father. Every few months he'd ask, and I never knew what to say." Alien was quiet a long moment. "What did you tell him? That his father was far away, strong and powerful, the strongest there is." She gave a small, sad smile. "That his father didn't know about him, but that it wasn't his fault. That it was the grown-ups' fault, and mine a little, and the world's mostly." Alien turned from the fire to look at her, and the firelight was in his storm-gray eyes, and the cold mask he had worn for 6 years was nowhere on his face at all. "It was my fault," he said. "Not the world's. Mine. I looked at you that first day, and I felt the bond, and I called you a transaction. To your face, because I was a coward, Rose, because it was easier to be cruel than to want something I'd convinced myself I couldn't have. He took a breath that shook. I have spent 6 years lying to myself. I am very tired of lying. Rose's heart was pounding. The wall of ice between them had thinned to almost nothing. But she had not forgiven him. Not yet. 6 years of grief did not melt in a single firelit evening, and she would not pretend otherwise, because pretending was the thing that had cost her everything in the first place. I'm glad, she said carefully. But I'm not ready, Alien. The boys are brothers and nothing will change that, and I will never keep Kieran from you again. But you and I, she shook her head. You don't undo 6 years with one fireside speech. I felt the bond too that first day, all of it. And I had to feel it alone in a tower, while you walked past me like I was furniture. So I'm glad you're tired of lying. But you're going to have to earn the rest, all of it. Alien looked at her for a long moment. And then, and this, more than the speech, was what began to truly thaw her. He did not argue. He did not push. He simply bowed his head, the most powerful wolf in all the lands, and said, Then I'll earn it, however long it takes. It was, Rose thought as she went to bed that night, the first thing he had ever said to her that she completely believed. She did not know that they had only days of peace left, for the boys' friendship had not gone unnoticed. The whole palace was talking now, that the cold alpha who had refused every match for 6 years was thawing at last around a nobody from the wild lands, and that the lonely heir, who had once let the Lady Vale believe she might be his mother, now ran laughing at the wild lands woman's side instead. And in her gold-trimmed rooms, Liliana Vale heard all of it, and set down her wine very carefully, and began to plan in earnest. Chapter 6. Liliana Vale had waited 6 years to be Luna, and she had not waited quietly. She had made herself close to Lucien, had let the lonely heir believe she might one day be his mother, had counted the Luna title as good as hers, and now some thin-faced widow from the edge of the world had walked into the palace with a stolen child and thawed the Alpha's heart in a matter of days. And worse, the boy she had so carefully courted now ran laughing at the widow's side, calling another woman's name. Liliana Vale was not a woman who lost gracefully, and she had just lost twice. She arrived at the palace the very next morning, in a carriage trimmed with gold, and swept into the great hall as though she already owned it. Alien, darling, she said, ignoring Rose entirely. I came the moment I heard. A second heir. What wonderful news for the bloodline. And of course, she let her gaze drift at last to Rose, and the look in it could have frozen a river. We must discuss the matter of a proper Luna. Now that there are 2 heirs, the pack will want stability. A Luna of good family, old blood, someone the elders approve of, someone the children already know and love. Her smile sharpened on the last word. The threat under the politeness was not even slightly hidden. Rose, who had spent her whole life being looked at like a burden, recognized the look at once and did not flinch from it. And who did you have in mind? Rose asked pleasantly. Myself, naturally. Alien and I have an understanding. We have for years, hasn't he told you? Why, little Lucien practically calls me.
There is no understanding,
Alien said flatly, and the words cut her off like a blade. He had gone very still and very cold. But it was a different cold now, Rose realized, not the cold he had once turned on her. It was the cold of a man whose patience has run out. There never was, the elders made promises in my name that I never made. You have sat with my son and filled his head with a future I never once promised you. I have refused you 12 times, Liliana, as gently as I knew how. I will not refuse gently again. Liliana's smile did not waver, but something behind her eyes turned to ice. The elders may feel differently. A Luna from the wild lands, with no bloodline, no family, no standing, who stole an heir no less. The pack will never accept her. The elders will never accept her. You may want this little widow, Alien, but want and rule are not the same thing, and you of all wolves know it. She gathered her skirts. I'll let you think on it. But do think quickly. These things have a way of being decided whether one likes it or not. She swept out. The great hall seemed colder for her having been in it. She'll go to the elders, Rose said quietly. Yes, Alien said. She will. He turned to her, and there was something fierce in his face now. Let her. I told you I would earn it, Rose. Let this be the start. Whatever the elders say, whatever Liliana schemes, I will not let anyone take you or the boys from me. Not again. Never again. And Rose, who had spent 6 years trusting no one but herself, felt something shift in her chest. The first real crack in the wall, not from the bond's patient pull, but from the man himself, standing between her and the cold and meaning it. The days that followed were strange and golden, and shadowed all at once. Liliana's threat hung over everything. The elders had begun to stir. Rose felt their disapproval like a draft through the palace. The cold gray men who had bought her body 6 years ago and now looked at her return as an inconvenience to be managed. She knew a reckoning was coming. But in the meantime, something else was happening. Something she had stopped believing she would ever have. Alian was courting her. He was terrible at it, which somehow made it better. This was a man who had ruled a feared pack for years, who had crushed enemies and commanded armies, and he had absolutely no idea how to make a woman believe he loved her. So he did it clumsily, in the only language he knew, through care. He had her old healing salves studied by the palace healers who declared them remarkable, and he told her so, watching her face when he said it. When he learned she had never in her life owned a warm winter cloak that hadn't been mended a dozen times, a cloak appeared, deep green, lined with fur, exactly her size. And he pretended he had nothing to do with it, and she pretended to believe him, and they both knew. And he was protective in a way that should have frightened her and instead, slowly, undid her. Once a visiting noble, a coarse, arrogant wolf from an allied pack, made a crude remark about Rose at dinner, a comment about wild lands, widows, and what they were good for. The whole table went silent, and Alian, very quietly, set down his knife and looked at the man, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees.
"You will apologize to the Lady Rose,"
Alian said, "and then you will leave my territory. And you will be grateful that you are leaving on your own feet." The noble left on his own feet very quickly. Later, Rose found Alian on the balcony, still simmering. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I've heard worse my whole life." "That's exactly why I had to," Alian said, looking at the moon. "You spent your whole life being treated as less than you are, by your pack, by the elders, by me, most of all by me." He turned to her. "I cannot undo the years, but I can make certain that under my roof you are never treated as less than what you are again. By anyone." Rose stood very close to him in the moonlight, the bond singing between them, 6 years of frost melting all at once, and she thought, Oh, I am in such terrible trouble." "And what am I?" she asked softly. "What is it you think I am, Alian Blackwood?" He looked at her for a long moment, and then he said the thing she had waited her whole life to hear, and never once expected. "You're the truest thing I've ever known," he said. "You're the mother of my sons. You're the mate the goddess gave me that I was too proud to keep. You're the woman I have loved since the first day I saw you, even when I was too much of a coward to say it." He reached out, slowly, and tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear, and his hand was trembling. "You asked me to earn it. I'll spend the rest of my life earning it, if you'll let me. But don't ask me to pretend I don't love you. I've done 6 years of pretending. I can't do it anymore." Rose did not answer with words. She rose on her toes and kissed him, there in the moonlight on the high balcony, and the bond blazed up between them like a struck flame, 6 years of grief and longing pouring into it, and Alian's arms came around her and held her as though he would never, ever let her go. When at last they broke apart, both shaking, Rose pressed her forehead to his chest, and let herself, for the first time since the night of the Bloodmoon, simply be held. "I haven't forgiven you," she whispered. "Not all the way, not yet. I know," he murmured into her hair. "But I'm getting there," she admitted. "Goddess help me, I'm getting there." Below them, unseen, 2 small shapes peered around the balcony door. Kieran and Lucian, who had crept out of bed and witnessed the entire thing, and who now exchanged a look of pure triumph and clasped their hands together in their secret language, plotting, as always, in plain sight. Their parents were going to be together. The brothers had decided it, and the brothers, as the palace was learning, generally got their way. What none of them saw, Not the kissing parents, not the scheming children, was the gray-cloaked figure of Elder Magda in the shadows of the courtyard below, watching the Alpha embrace the Wildlands widow with cold, final calculation. The elders had bought this woman once, used her, discarded her, erased her from the records, and now she stood on the Alpha's balcony being loved like a Luna, threatening everything the elders had built. That, Magda decided, could not be allowed to stand. Chapter 7. They came for her 3 days later, and they came in force. Rose was summoned to the great marble hall, the same hall where, 6 years ago, she had knelt and signed away her future. The 7 elders sat in their half-circle of carved chairs, gray and ancient and cold. Liliana Vale stood to one side in a gown of silver, her chin high, the picture of the proper Luna they intended to install. And at the center, in the highest chair, sat Elder Magda, who looked at Rose with the eyes of a woman examining a stain she intended to remove. Alien was not there. Rose understood at once that this was deliberate, that they had summoned her while the Alpha was away inspecting the southern border, precisely so that he could not interfere. "You should not have come back," Magda said without preamble. "You broke the contract. You stole pack property, an heir of the Blackwood line. By every law of this pack, your life is forfeit. We could have you executed where you stand, and the law would call it justice." Rose's blood ran cold, but she did not let it show. "Then why haven't you?" A thin smile. "Because we are not without mercy, and because the Alpha foolishly has grown attached to you, and we would prefer not to make an enemy of him if it can be avoided, so we offer you a choice." Magda leaned forward. "You will leave, tonight. Quietly. You will sign a new document renouncing all claim to either child and to the Alpha. You will take a sum of money, generous this time, and you will vanish back into the Wildlands and never return. The boys will stay. The Lady Liliana will become Luna, as was always intended, and will raise both heirs as her own. The pack will have its stability, and you will have your life. And if I refuse? Then you will be tried for the theft of an heir," Magda said. "And you will be found guilty, because you are guilty, and you will be executed. And the boys will be told their mother was a thief and a criminal who abandoned them. Either way, you leave the children. The only question is whether you leave them with your life, or without it." It was the same trap as 6 years ago, sprung the same cold way. Choose between yourself and your children. Choose between your life and their futures. The elders had built their whole power on this single cruel lever, and they pulled it now with the ease of long practice. But Rose was not the frightened girl she had been 6 years ago. "No," she said. The word rang out in the cold marble hall. Magda's eyes narrowed. "No? You misunderstand me," Rose said, and her voice did not shake at all. "I'm not refusing your offer. I'm refusing the whole thing. The contract, the threats, all of it. 6 years ago, you backed me into a corner because I was poor and frightened, and you held my father's life over my head. And I let you because I had no choice. But I'm not poor and frightened anymore, and you don't hold anything over me now. You want to try me for stealing my own son? Do it. Drag it into the open. Let the whole pack hear how the elders sold the Alpha's mate like livestock, how they rode a living child into a grave to keep their precious contract clean. Let them hear all of it. I am done being afraid of you." The hall was utterly silent. Liliana's polished composure had cracked. She was staring at Rose as though at a madwoman. Even the ancient elders shifted in their seats. Magda's face had gone white with fury. "You insolent little—" "She's right, you know." The voice came from the doorway. Every head turned. Alpha Alien Blackwood stood in the entrance of the great hall, and he was not supposed to be there. He was meant to be at the southern border, and the look on his face was the look that had made him feared across 3 territories. "The border inspection ended early," Alien said, walking slowly into the hall. "Strange thing. I had a feeling I was needed at home. The bond, perhaps." His storm-gray eyes swept the half-circle of elders. "I've heard enough through that door to have you all removed from your seats. You summoned my mate the moment my back was turned, threatened her life. Schemed to install a Luna I have refused a dozen times. Did you truly believe I wouldn't learn of it?" "Alpha," Magda said, recovering quickly. "You are not thinking clearly. This woman has bewitched you. She is a thief and a nobody, of no bloodline. She is my mate, Alian said. Fated. The bond is real, you of all people know it's real, because it was in your records 6 years ago, and you hid it from me, and you bought her like a broodmare rather than let me have the mate the goddess chose. Don't speak to me of bloodlines, Magda. You've spent your whole life trading in them. You don't believe in the goddess's will. You believe in your own power. And I am finished letting you exercise it over my family. The pack will never accept her, Liliana burst out, her composure gone entirely. A wildlands widow with no name, no blood, no power. The pack needs a Luna of standing, a Luna who— The pack will accept whom I tell them to accept, Elian said. No, Magda cut in, hard and final now, all pretense of mercy gone. It will not. There are laws even an alpha cannot break. A Luna must have true strength. Wolf strength, the strength to defend the pack. It is ancient law, and this woman, she pointed one gray finger at Rose, is an Omega, the weakest of wolves. By the oldest law of this pack she cannot take the title, whatever you wish, whatever the bond claims. Even you cannot change what she is. And it was true. That was the terrible thing. Rose felt it land in the hall like a stone. Felt Alian's certainty falter, because Magda had reached past his power to something even an alpha could not override. The ancient law, and the simple fact that Rose was, by every measure anyone had ever taken, a powerless Omega. The goddess herself would have to descend and name her, Magda said, soft and triumphant, and the goddess does not descend for Wildlands widows. So we return to my offer. The woman leaves or the woman dies. No amount of an alpha's love can open a third door. The hall fell silent. Alian's jaw worked. For the first time, Rose saw him at a loss. The law a wall even he could not breach. Liliana began, very slightly, to smile again. And Rose, who had faced them down with such fire a moment before, felt the fire gutter, because she could win every argument in this hall and still lose. The law did not care how brave she was. It cared what she was. There is your answer, Alpha, Magda said softly. Love is not strength, wanting is not power. She is an Omega, and an Omega she will remain. Rose looked at Alian. She saw him searching for a way through and finding none. And rather than stand there and watch him fail in front of the elders who had wronged her, rather than let them see her break, she lifted her chin one last time. I'll give you my answer tomorrow, she said. Not because she had one, but because she needed to be out of that hall before the tears came. And she turned and walked out, past the gray elders and the smiling Liliana, alone, with no power and no plan, and nothing at all but the love that the law said did not count. She did not yet understand that the law was wrong about that. That love was the one thing it had never thought to measure. She found out an hour later, when Kieran began to die. Chapter 8. It began with a scream from the children's chamber. Rose was there in seconds. She found Kieran on the floor, convulsing, his small body racked with silver light that flickered and stuttered like a guttering flame, and Lucien crouched over him, terrified, calling his brother's name. He healed a bird, Lucien sobbed. A broken bird, like always, but this time he couldn't stop. The light wouldn't stop. It kept pouring out of him, and then he just fell. Rose understood at once, with a mother's horror. The healing gift had a price. Kieran had always given a little of his own life to mend what he touched. A few minutes here, a spark there, too small to matter. But the power was moonborn power, vast and untrained in a 6-year-old body, and it had slipped its leash, and now it was pouring out of him without stopping, draining him, emptying him. He was healing the whole world by accident, and it was killing him. The palace healers came running and could do nothing. This was no fever, no wound. It was a child's soul running out through his hands like water, and there was no medicine for it in all the lands. There is no cure, my lady, the head healer said, gray-faced. The gift is consuming him. We can only make him comfortable. No. Rose dropped to her knees and gathered her dying son into her arms. His skin was cold. The silver light was dimming, not because it had stopped, but because there was so little of him left to fuel it. Her gentle boy, who had survived the night of the Bloodmoon, who had come back to life once in her arms, he was slipping away a second time, and this time she had nothing. No window to climb out of, no medicine to carry him to. Nothing but her own 2 arms and her own breaking heart. "Stay with me," she begged. "Kieran, my love, stay, please." And then she understood what she had to do. If the gift ran on life, then let it run on hers. She did not know if it was possible. She only knew she would not sit and hold her son while he died. Not again. Not ever again. She had given everything for this child once. She would give the last thing she had now. Rose pressed both her hands over Kieran's small, still heart, and she did the thing no one had taught her, the thing that came from somewhere older than instinct. She opened the deepest room of herself, the one she had walled away for 6 years, and she poured everything she was into her son. Her warmth, her strength, her life. "Take it," she whispered, weeping. "Take all of it. Take mine instead. I would rather die than lose you, do you hear me? I would rather die. Take it." And the buried thing in her blood, which the elders had failed to measure, which the law said did not exist, the buried thing woke at last. Not because of fury, not because of need, because of this, because a mother had chosen, freely and without hesitation, to give her own life for her child. Love had reached the place that nothing else could reach. Silver light blazed up out of Rose, not the flickering, dying light of Kieran's gift, but something vast and steady and ancient. A light the exact silver of the full moon. It poured down her arms and into her son, and where his power had been draining out, hers came flooding in, endless, a sea where he had been a guttering candle. The cold left his skin. His heart steadied. The wild light gentled, soothed, drawn back into him and quieted by a power that knew how to hold it. Kieran opened his eyes. "Mama," he whispered, "you're glowing." Rose looked down at her own hands, blazing silver, and felt the knowledge come flooding in behind the power. Images, memories that were not her own, a lineage stretching back into the deeps of time. Silver-blooded women crowned beneath full moons. The first Luna who ever lived. She understood, all at once, the truth that had been buried in her since birth. She did not have to be told what she was. She already knew. She had just proven it. Not in a marble hall, not before the elders, but here, on the floor of a children's room, with her son's life in her hands. She was Moonborn. The first bloodline. And she had not been given the power. She had earned it, the only way it could ever truly be earned, by loving someone more than her own life. The chamber door burst open. Alian, who had felt the silver blaze through the bond from across the palace. Behind him, drawn by the impossible light, came the elders and Magda at their head, and they stopped dead in the doorway, every one of them, at the sight of the Wild Land's widow kneeling in a column of moonlight with her healed son in her arms. "No," Magda whispered. Her face had gone slack with an ancient terror. "It isn't possible. The Moonborn line died out 1,000 years ago. The bloodline was lost." "Not lost," Rose said, and rose to her feet, Kieran safe against her, the silver light still glowing softly from her skin. Her voice had a new note in it now, old and ringing. "Buried? In a foundling. In an orphan no one wanted. In the girl your elders bought because they sensed something in her blood and were too blind to understand what it was." She faced Magda without fear. "You told me there was no third door. You were wrong. There was a door no elder could see because none of you ever understood the one thing that opens it. You measured my strength and found nothing because you were measuring the wrong thing. The power was never in how hard I could fight. It was in how much I could love. And that, Magda, you never thought to test. And it was then, only then, when Rose had already proven herself, already saved her son, already claimed with her own act what she was, that the moon goddess came to confirm it. The full moon's light poured suddenly through the windows, though it was not yet night, and a presence filled the room, vast and ancient and unmistakable, and every wolf there, the elders, Magda, even Alian, sank to their knees beneath the weight of it. Only Rose remained standing, and Kieran in her arms, the two of them lit silver from within. "Daughter," said the presence, in a voice felt more than heard. "You have found your way home. Not because I opened the door, because you walked through it, The light turned, taking in the kneeling elders, the trembling Magda. They measured my daughter and called her worthless. They saw my design, the first line and the strongest alpha, bound by my own hand before either drew breath, and called it a transaction. The light pulsed, and Alien, kneeling, made a sound of shame, for the word was his own. But I do not name her Luna today. She named herself when she gave her life for her child, and the power answered. I only speak aloud what she has already proven. Let this hall hear it, and let none deny it. Rose of the first line is the true Luna of the Bloodmoon pack. Not by my gift, by her own heart, the strongest power I ever made. The light blazed once and receded, drawing back into Rose until only a soft glow remained, and the moon's impossible light faded from the windows, and the presence withdrew, leaving the chamber ringing with silence. Slowly the wolves rose from their knees. Elder Magda was the last to rise, and when she did, she was a different woman. Gray and shrunken and old, all her cold power broken in a single moment. She had spent her life trading in bloodlines and dismissing the goddess as a story the weak told themselves, and the goddess had come, before her very eyes, and named the foundling she had bought and discarded as the true Luna. "My Lady Luna," Magda said, and her voice cracked on it, and she bowed, the proud elder bowing at last. "Forgive us, we did not know, we could not have known." "You could have known," Rose said quietly. The silver glow had faded, she was herself again, only herself. But something in her had changed forever, straightened, settled, come home. "You could have known if you had treated a frightened poor girl with even a little kindness 6 years ago. The goddess didn't hide me from you. Your own contempt did. You looked at me and saw nothing worth seeing, and so you saw nothing at all. She let that land. But I am not interested in your punishment. I have spent 6 years on the wrong side of cruelty, and I have no taste for being on this side of it. So hear me, elders. You will not be executed. You will not be cast out. But you will never again sell a soul to keep your records clean, and you will never again decide that a wolf is worthless because she is poor or weak or unwanted. Those days are finished. I am Luna now, and I remember exactly what it is to be the one no one will speak for. And the elders, every one of them, bowed. Liliana Vale was not there to bow, but word of what had happened in the children's chamber reached her within the hour, and she stood at her window white-faced, all her schemes turned to ash. The lonely heir she had courted now had a true mother, blessed by the goddess, beloved by the pack. There was no honest door left for her, and a woman denied every honest door will go looking for a dishonest one. "This isn't over," she whispered to her reflection, something breaking behind her eyes. "You've made enemies you don't even know you have, widow. We'll see how your divine little blessing holds." That night she slipped out of the palace and did not return. And the threat she had hissed at her own mirror was not empty at all. For somewhere to the north, the enemies she spoke of were real, and she was already riding toward them. But that was for later. For now, in the children's chamber where she had nearly lost her son and instead found herself, Rose turned to face the man who had called her a transaction and learned, too late and not too late, exactly what she was. Alien went down on one knee before her. Not the kneeling of the goddess's compulsion, but the kneeling of a man who chooses it. "I called you a transaction once," he said, looking up at her, his voice breaking. "And you were the goddess's own daughter, my fated mate, the mother of my sons, all of that, and I was too proud to see it. I don't ask you to forgive me yet, only to let me spend the rest of my life deserving what I threw away." Rose looked down at him a long moment. Then she reached down and took his hands and drew him to his feet. "Get up," she said softly. "Lunas don't let their alphas kneel." And then, quieter, just for him, "I'm close, Alien. So close to forgiving you. Save my children one more time and I think you'll have it." She did not know how soon she would be proven right. For even as she spoke, far to the north, a war horn sounded across the wild lands, and a rival alpha, who had heard whispers of a powerful second bloodline waking in the Bloodmoon pack and meant to seize or destroy it before it grew, was already marching on the palace, with an army at his back. Chapter 9. His name was Alpha Varga, and he came with 300 wolves. He was an old enemy of the Bloodmoon pack, a brutal warlord from the northern wastes who had long coveted their territory. For 6 years he had not dared move against Alian Blackwood, but his spies had carried him strange news, that the Cold Alpha had gone soft over a woman and 2 children, and that an ancient, dangerous bloodline had woken in the pack, a power that, allowed to grow, might make the Bloodmoon pack unstoppable forever. Varga was not a wolf to let a threat grow. He marched, meaning to kill the moonborn Luna and her sons before they came into their full strength. He reached the palace at dusk. Alian met him on the field before the gates with every fighter the pack could muster, fewer than Varga's 300, but fierce, defending their home. And behind the lines in the palace, Rose gathered the children and prepared for the worst. But the worst found them anyway. It was Liliana who let them in. Bitter, spurned Liliana, who had found Varga's camp and made a bargain. Revenge for the Luna title she had lost. She knew the palace's secret ways, the old servants' tunnels and postern gates, and while the battle raged at the front, she led a band of Varga's best killers in through the back, straight toward the one target that mattered most, the children. Rose felt it before she saw it, felt the bond scream a warning, felt Alian's distant terror as some part of him sensed the danger turning toward his sons. She turned from the window just as the door of the children's chamber burst open and the northern wolves poured in. What happened next happened fast, and it belonged to the boys. A killer lunged for Kieran, and Lucian, 6 years old but trained since he could walk, the future alpha, did not freeze. He threw himself in front of his brother and took a slash meant for Kieran across his own arm, going down hard, bleeding but snarling up from the floor and refusing to move from in front of his brother. The son raised with power had been born to protect, and he protected. And Kieran, gentle Kieran, who pulled his punches, who carried injured birds home in his hands, saw his brother bleeding and discovered in that instant that there are things stronger than gentleness. He dropped to Lucian's side and pressed both hands to the wound, and the healing gift poured out of him, silver and sure, and the slash closed clean. The son raised with love had been born to heal, and he healed his brother first of all. But the killers were still coming, and 2 small boys could not hold them, so they did the thing no one had taught them, the thing only twins of the first bloodline could do. Lucian surged back to his feet and seized his brother's hand. "Together," he said, the way they'd said it 100 times over a wounded bird. "We're better together." Kieran gripped back, and the 2 flung out their joined hands toward the oncoming wolves, the gentle one and the fierce one, the power and the love, and a single blinding pulse of silver force erupted from them as one and threw every killer backward against the walls like leaves in a gale. It bought just enough time. Rose was already moving, and Rose was no longer the frightened woman who had fled a tower window 6 years ago. The moonborn power was awake in her. Her children were in danger. And there is nothing in all the world more dangerous than a mother of the first bloodline between killers and her sons. She blazed silver, and the light filled the chamber, and a wall of moonfire rose up around all 3 of them, a barrier no blade could cross. The northern killers were driven back and back toward the door, scorched by a light that burned only those who meant the children harm, until they broke and fled. And there, in the doorway, watching her whole bargain collapse, stood Liliana. "You," Rose said, the moonlight blazing around her, "you led killers to my children, to the boy you once called your own." Liliana backed away, white-faced. "It wasn't supposed to. I only wanted—" "Go," Rose said. "Run back to whatever's left of Varga's army and tell them what you saw here. Tell them what guards these children now." And the moonfire surged, and Liliana fled shrieking down the corridor, and was not seen in the Bloodmoon territory ever again. On the field before the gates, the tide of the battle turned. For when Rose's power blazed up in the palace, it blazed across the whole territory. Every Bloodmoon wolf felt it, a surge of the goddess's own strength pouring into them through their new Luna, and they fought with a fury and a power they had never known. And Alian, at the center of the line, felt his mate's power flow into him through the bond and became something terrible to behold. The strongest alpha in living memory, fighting now not for territory or pride but for his mate and his sons, lit from within by the moonborn light. He cut his way through Varga's army to the warlord himself, and the two alphas met in the center of the field, and it was no contest at all. Varga had come to crush a pack made soft by love. He found instead a pack made unbreakable by it. Alian fought with the goddess's light in his veins, and 6 years of buried grief behind every blow, and Varga broke before him like ice before a flood. "You came to destroy my family," Alian said, standing over the fallen warlord. "And instead, you've shown me exactly what my family is worth. Yield and run." Varga yielded. His army, broken and leaderless and terrified of the silver light blazing from the palace, scattered into the night. The battle was over before the moon had fully risen. Alian ran for the palace, taking the stairs 3 at a time, the bond screaming at him, and burst into the children's chamber to find them safe. All of them. Rose, the silver light fading from her skin, gathering both boys into her arms. Kieran and Lucian, scraped and shaken but whole, refusing to let go of each other. All of them alive. Alian stopped in the doorway and simply looked at them. His whole family, whole and breathing, in one room for the first time in 6 years. And then he crossed the room and fell to his knees and wrapped his arms around all 3 of them at once, and the 4 of them knelt there together on the floor of the children's chamber, holding on, while outside the last of the enemy fled into the dark, and the full moon climbed at last into a clear and silver sky. "You came," Rose whispered into his shoulder. "I will always come," Alian said fiercely. "Do you understand me? For the rest of my life. Whatever comes for you, for them, I will always come. I swear it on the goddess. I swear it on the bond. I will always come." And Rose, holding her 2 sons and her mate in the moonlight, felt the very last of the wall around her heart crumble into nothing. "I know," she said. And then at last the words she had not been able to say, "I forgive you, Alian, all of it, I forgive you." He pulled back to look at her, hardly daring to believe it. "I forgive you," she said again, and she was crying and smiling at once. "You came too late, 6 years too late, but not too late. Not too late for this. Not too late for us." She touched his face. "Love came late, but it came, and it's enough. It's more than enough." Kieran at his father's sleeve. "Papa," he said. The first time he had ever called him that, and Alian's breath caught at the word. "Papa, are we a family now?" Alian looked at his son, at both his sons, at his mate, at the whole impossible gift the goddess had given him, and he had almost thrown away. "Yes," he said, and his voice broke clean in half. "Yes, we're a family now. We always were. We just had to find our way back to each other." They held the ceremony 1 month later, on the night of the full moon. The whole pack gathered in the great courtyard of the palace. The same pack that, the elders had once warned, would never accept a wild land's widow as their Luna. But the elders had been wrong about that, as they had been wrong about everything. The story had spread to every corner of the territory. How the Luna had poured out her own life to save her dying son, and how the ancient moonborn power had woken in her because of it. How the goddess herself had come to confirm what a mother's love had already proven. How the Luna had raised a wall of moonfire to save both heirs, and how her power had flowed into every Bloodmoon wolf on the battlefield and turned 300 enemies to fleeing shadows. The pack did not merely accept Rose. The pack adored her. They had felt her power in their own veins. They knew exactly what stood at their alpha's side now. And so when Alian Blackwood stood before his assembled pack beneath the full moon and took Rose's hand and spoke, the whole courtyard fell silent to hear him. "6 years ago," Alian said, and his voice carried across the silent crowd. "The elders of this pack made a contract. They found a frightened, poor young woman, and they bought her body to carry my heirs, and they told her she would never be Luna. That she was too weak, too low, too nothing. And he paused and made himself say it, before the whole pack, holding nothing back. I looked at her, my fated mate, the goddess's own gift to me, and I called her a transaction, to her face. It was the greatest mistake of my life. and I made it out of pride and fear, and I spent 6 years paying for it, without even knowing what I had lost." The crowd was utterly still. "I tell you this not because I am proud of it. I am ashamed of it. I was wrong. About her, about the bond, about what makes a wolf worthy. She was never weak. She was the strongest soul I have ever known. Long before any of us knew her blood. She raised one of my sons alone, with nothing, and made him the gentlest, bravest boy in these lands. She came back into the very den that wronged her, faced down the elders who threatened her life, and gave her own life to save our son. And the goddess herself came to confirm what her heart had already proven. She forgave me when I had earned no forgiveness at all." He turned to face Rose fully and took both her hands, and the moonlight fell silver across them both. "Rose of the Moonborn line," Alian said, "true Luna of the Bloodmoon pack. Made of my body and my soul, I claim you now before my whole pack, not as the Elder's contract, not as a transaction, but as the only thing you ever were and the only thing you ever will be to me, my mate, my Luna, the love of my life, the mother of my sons. Will you have me, late as I am, flawed as I am? Will you have me, and let me spend the rest of my life loving you the way I should have loved you from the first?" And Rose, who had been adopted by a poor pack and treated like a burden, who had been bought and used and written into a grave, who had fled into a winter night with a child in her arms and built a whole life out of nothing but love and stubbornness. Rose looked at the man who had wronged her and earned his way back, and she answered before the whole pack and the full moon and the goddess who watched over them all. "I will," she said. "I do. I have. Goddess help me, alien Blackwood. I think I always would have." The pack erupted. The courtyard rang with their howls. 300 voices and more raised to the full moon in joy, the sound rolling out across the territory and into the wild lands beyond. And the moon poured down its silver light on the new Luna and her alpha, as they were bound at last, truly and rightly, the way it should have been from the very beginning. And in the midst of all of it, 2 small boys broke free of the crowd and flung themselves at their parents, and Alian scooped up Lucien and Rose caught Kieran, and the 4 of them stood, together in the moonlight. The family that had been broken on a blood moon 6 years ago, whole again at last beneath a full one. The days that followed were quiet and good, in the way that the best days are. The elders kept their seats, but they were changed. They had bowed to the goddess and to the Luna they had wronged, and they ruled gentler now, with Rose's eye always on them. She made it her true work as Luna to see that no frightened, poor, unwanted soul in the territory would ever again be treated as nothing. She remembered always what it was to be the one no one would speak for, and so she became the one who spoke for them. The twins grew up together, as they should always have done. Lucien, the future alpha, learned gentleness from his brother. Kieran, the healer, learned courage from his. They were never again apart. They kept their secret language all their lives and grew into the kind of brothers other wolves told stories about. The gentle one and the fierce one. 2 halves of a single whole that nothing in the world could break again. And Rose and Alien. They had lost 6 years. That was the truth of it, and they never pretended otherwise. The wound had been real. The lost time was lost for good. But they had all the rest of it, and they did not waste a single day. One evening, perhaps a year after the ceremony, Rose found Alian standing on the high balcony where she had first kissed him, looking out at the moon, as he always had, except that everything was different now. She came and stood beside him, and he put his arm around her without a word, and they watched the moon together. "Do you ever think," Rose said softly, "about how close we came to never having this? If Kieran hadn't gotten sick, if I'd never come back, if you'd never walked into that healing house." "Every day," Alian said, "and then I stop thinking about it because it's unbearable, and I think about this instead." He drew her closer. "We came so close to losing everything, but we didn't. The goddess is cruel, Rose, the way the elders always said, cruel enough to let us lose 6 years. But she's kind, too. Kind enough to give us all the years after." He pressed his lips to her hair. "Love came late for us. Too late to save those 6 years, but not too late." "Not too late to heal the rest," Rose murmured. "Not too late to heal the rest," he agreed. Below them, in the courtyard, 2 boys' laughter floated up through the warm night. the twins chasing each other beneath the moon, whole and happy and home. And Rose leaned into her mate's side and looked at her sons and felt the last of the old ache in her heart go quiet at last. Love had come late, but it had come, and it had been enough, more than enough, to heal a family that had been broken on a blood moon and to make it whole again, forever, beneath the full one. The end. Before you go, if Rose and Kyle's journey touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps these stories reach more people who love romance, family, and second chances. And to every single subscriber who returns to listen to these stories, thank you. You've built a wonderful community here, and your support makes every chapter, every character, and every ending possible. Leave a comment below and tell me, who broke your heart the most? Rose, Kyle, Lucien, or Kieran? Until our next story,